welcome to this week's episode of Seeking Proof, Finding Grace. I'm your host, Ron Campbell, and this week, as with every week, I want to start off by reminding you of the most important truth in the entire universe. God loves you. This week, we begin our journey. We are putting kind of in the rearview mirror this question of, were we created or are we the product of a naturalistic process? And we have determined through all of the previous episodes, the 98 or so previous episodes before, that the best explanation is that we are the product of an intelligent third party. But the question becomes, who is that intelligent third party? Now, what I want to challenge you with is this, and I want to walk through this statement and kind of give you a feel for where we're going. If the Bible presents a coherent worldview, we're going to talk about that in just a second, and if Jesus was a real person, if he claimed to be God and he backed up that claim through his life, death, and resurrection after having been crucified, then we need to seriously consider what the Bible brings to us and the message that it brings forward. And now, what I just put on the table, there's a lot of stuff there. And this is going to be the journey that we're going to be walking through, trying to answer those questions. You know, I started with, if the Bible presents a coherent worldview. There's a lot of different definitions out there that you can find on worldview. What a worldview should encompass, what it is, what it should be, what it should do. One of my favorite definitions says that any worldview should address 4 different points: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Now, when we think about those 4 points, it should be coherent. So there might be a worldview that, you know, you can look at and say, well, I love the idea of the destiny of where that worldview points to. It's great, but if it can't address the origin of how we got here, or it's so horribly wrong on the origin piece, and the morality piece is awfully shaky, and, well, I don't know, the meaning part of it, I mean, it only has meaning if you really like the outcome. It's got to be something that holds all 4 of those together, and that kind of makes sense as you think about it. One of the fundamental problems that we talked about, quite a ways ago, when we were looking at naturalism was, naturalism struggles to bring together a coherent worldview. When you address first the question of origin, naturalism's got nothing, and that's the biggie that we've been addressing this whole time. We've looked at those 5 points: the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning argument, the argument for looking at life, the argument of consciousness, and the argument around morality. When we've looked at those and we address those points, especially the first 4, when we look at that, naturalism fails to put a really coherent argument on the table for our origin. And the hopelessness that then follows. So when you look at origin and it falls apart for naturalism, and that's what we spent all this time looking at. Then when you get to the next question of meaning, you go, well, I mean, you get a lot of, atheists who will admit that life is about the meaning that you find, but there's no actual coherent meaning that comes along with a naturalistic worldview. There isn't any real meaning. Doesn't mean you can't find meaning. I'm not arguing that. You can certainly find meaning, but there's no built-in meaning. There's no coherent, again, something that ties your origin and then meaning and then morality and then destiny. If you argue from a naturalistic perspective, what is the ultimate destiny of naturalism? Well, it's the heat death of the universe. It's nothingness. The universe ultimately came from nothing, and to nothing it will return. So there is no endpoint. The destiny is bleak, to say the least. From a moral perspective, we spent an enormous amount of time. We spent several months addressing the question of morality, and that naturalism struggles mightily to come up with anything other than, well, a consensus. But then again, we couldn't judge between competing consensuses. And so again, I would urge you to go back and look at those episodes. So when you look at that, can you make a coherent worldview out of naturalism if we address origin, meaning, morality, and destiny? And I would strongly argue that the evidence that we've seen is no. Naturalism provides no worldview. It simply cannot. Certainly you can argue for pieces and parts, but there's no coherent bringing all of those together. So let me make the case. And let me make the argument for Christianity and why it makes such a very strong argument. Christianity's argument is that God created everything that we see around us. And before he laid the foundations of the universe, looking ahead in time, he recognized the goal of all of this, the destiny, is to spend eternity with his creation, not as servants, but as family. So God is looking for an eternal relationship with us. He's looking at the end point before he sets the beginning. So we've already got both ends covered. We have the beginning and the end. The purpose of the beginning is to get to the end, which answers a lot of questions for us if we're being honest along the way. Because what happens at the beginning and in the middle, again, has a goal of the end. So from a coherence perspective, we know that the goal is to get us into an eternal relationship with our Creator. And at the very beginning, Ephesians chapter 1, we've quoted it a lot of times. But at the beginning, before laying the foundations of the earth, God recognized that to get us from the beginning to the end was going to take him sacrificing himself, laying down eternity, becoming one of his creation, living amongst us, and dying on the cross to pay our sin debt in full, to redeem us back to him, that it was going to take him doing all of that. So at the beginning, he determined this is the end that we're shooting for, and so this is what the beginning looks like. In between that gives tremendous meaning to us. We have enormous meaning now wrapped around us. Our life here on this world is just the first step into eternity. What we do here means everything for the next phase of our life in eternity, but it's only a small piece of it. And so now our life on this earth has tremendous meaning because it has an eternal purpose. And then when we wrap around that, the morality that we have, which began in the Old Testament, looking at the law and looking, again, there's going to be purpose. And I know some people will go out there going, the Old Testament, oh my goodness, we have all these issues with the Old Testament. We'll eventually talk about all of those. But when you look at what we learn in the Old Testament, and then as Jesus goes through and lives the Old Testament for us, as he goes through and goes, you think it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But what I'm telling you is God's heart is that you shouldn't even look at a woman and lust after her. And if you've done that, you've already committed adultery. I'm not going to just look at the bar. I'm going to raise the bar so high that I'm going to really show you that it's grace. Grace is how I get you home. You don't have to earn your way there. Grace is going to get you home. So the work that I do on the cross is what gets you across the finish line. When we look at that message in total, we have origin that is immediately connected to our destiny. And in between, we have meaning and we have morality. And we have all of these wrapped together. And one of the strengths that you'll find of the message of Christianity is that it creates the most, in my opinion, the most coherent worldview that you could possibly have. Because again, it's woven together in this one rich tapestry. Now, there may be some out there who are saying, I've got disagreement with God. I don't like this, I don't like this, and I don't like this. And as I said on the last episode, it's okay to bring those concerns to him. But what we're going to do is begin this journey. And once we can look at this and say, is there enough evidence to support the claim that Christianity is the right path, is the one true path to find God? That Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but through him. If there is evidence to support that, that helps bring so much more together. Because again, when you look at just one part of it and you say, I don't like the morals stated in the Bible, and you try to separate out one part of the four, and you don't look at all four together, it doesn't work. And this is why we have a lot of issue, because we get focused in on one part of the four. We forget the origin, the destiny, and the meaning. We forget that all of those come together again in this incredibly interwoven tapestry that you're going to find. And the proof is far greater than what you may realize. So what I want to encourage you to do as we look at this, the worldview that we're pursuing, and again, I would encourage you to look at any of the rest. When you look at other faith systems, when you look at something like naturalism, can you build a coherent worldview around them? You might be able to build it around a piece. You might go, well, I like this piece of this one, and I kind of like this piece of this one. But the reason they end up empty is because they don't have all four that bring them together. And all four, from our perspective as human beings, we yearn for the end. Where did we come from? Where are we going? What is my purpose? And what do I know about the Creator who created me? Those are the questions that drive us. And at the end of the day, that's why I love this definition of worldview. When you have something that brings those 4 points together, it really is the most fulfilling answer. So we are going to be looking at an enormous number of things as we go forward. I raised before the question, if Jesus was a real person and he claimed to be God, and he backed up that claim, how do we look at that? Okay, there's a lot of things that we do. Number one, we're going to look at the how did we know Jesus was a real person is remarkably easy. Outside of the internet, that's pretty well settled thousands of years ago. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about this question of how can we trust the Bible? Where do we get the Bible from? What's all this stuff about translations, and are there errors and discrepancies? And people will say, oh, the Bible's been corrupted. What does that actually mean? And what you're going to find is there's a lot more noise on the internet than there is real truth to this statement. You know, it's as with everything else, a kernel of truth can be taken a lot of very dangerous ways. So we're going to look at all of that in the months and probably years to come as we look at this question. But I want to leave you with this quote, and I want to leave you with something to think about. This is from a book, this is from N.T. Wright's book, Looking at the Resurrection. And I want to start us off on this journey by thinking about something of how remarkably unlikely the message is. And if you were going to make something up, you would never do it this way. So I want to encourage you with this. It says here, and this is talking about how the church began. This subversive belief in Jesus Lordship, over and against that of Caesar, was held in the teeth of the fact that Caesar had demonstrated his superior power in an obvious way, by having Jesus crucified. But the truly extraordinary thing is that this belief was held by a tiny group, who for the first 2 or 3 generations at least could hardly have mounted a riot in a village, let alone a revolution in an empire. And yet they persisted against all the odds, attracting the unwelcome notice of authorities because of the power of the message and the worldview and lifestyle it generated and sustained. And whenever we go back to the key text for evidence of why they persisted in such an improbable and dangerous belief, they answer, it is because Jesus of Nazareth was raised from the dead. And this provokes us to ask once more, why did they make this claim? I love that statement. And I love this as we go forward in this journey. And I want you to think about that for a minute. The most remarkable of claims in the face of intense persecution, for those who were witnesses, for those who were there, and they knew whether or not it was the truth, why would they make such an audacious claim, given the fact that it didn't make any sense on the surface? Like he said, Jesus had lost. From the world's perspective, Pontius Pilate had put him to death. He was crucified and gone. Why claim something that you know wasn't true? Unless the unthinkable is true. What if it really happened? So as we get ready to begin this next phase of our journey, I want to encourage you with an open heart. If at any time you're curious, once again, please open the pages of the Bible. And with an open heart, start at Matthew, start at John, begin somewhere in the New Testament. I love Matthew, it's my preference. John is also fantastic. If at any point you want to begin looking at God with an open heart and with a willingness to actually read and let the Bible talk to you, open the pages. And ask God to show you something. Ask God to reveal himself to you. He will be there. I want to thank you so much for joining me this week. And I want to thank you for joining me on the next phase of this journey as we look at the answer to the most important question of all. Who is that Creator? Thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll consider hitting the like button for the episode and the subscribe button for the podcast. If you have questions for us, you can reach out to us at prooftogracee@yahoo.com via email. You can find helpful information on our website at prooftogracee.com. And as always, you can find our podcasts on Yahoo, iTunes, or Spotify. And I want to thank you once again. We are going to have such a good time with this journey. I hope you'll consider coming along with us as we answer some of the most difficult questions out there. And what you'll find is a lot of the noise on the internet is just that. It's a lot of noise. And the truth is easier to find than you might think. Thank you once again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next time.